Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to InnoVint's second Academy session. You are with us today because you've subscribed to the series. Each month, we are hosting these training sessions for our users to take your InnoVint skills to the next level. Last month, the topic was on end-of-year compliance considerations. And next month in February, we'll be talking about vineyard tracking overview. So if you're interested in how InnoVint manage everything before harvest, please join, and we look forward to walking you through that. So today's session is around costing and our costing module, and I will be your host. Thank you for joining again. Our agenda today is as follows. So first off, we have a mixed bag of users today. We have winemakers, winery owners, and financial professionals. So I want to make sure that we cover the basics of winery costing and the fundamentals behind what is this acronym COGS, why is it important to track. Second, we'll be talking about InnoVint's costing feature, of course, and how it works. And from here, I'll be jumping into a live demo account where I'll walk through some best practices and tips and tricks around entering and managing your costs. And then we'll be ending with a Q&A. So first off, what is cost of goods sold? Why is it important to a winery? InnoVint's module follows GAAP, which stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, a common framework. And that defines COGS as basically all of your costs associated and directly related to your production operations and producing your wine. So a component of that is, of course, raw materials. The most obvious one being grapes. It's probably your most expensive raw material. But there are other raw materials as well, and direct cost inputs like additives, like your packaging inventory. And then there's also overhead allocations. So your winery is probably renting or leasing a space. The facility costs associated with that space, utilities, rent. And then another example of an overhead is labor. There's production labor. You have staff, they have salaries, they have benefits. All those tie directly into cost of goods sold. And this flow chart here illustrates this well. So you start with your raw materials inputs, you have this work in process or work in progress, your inventory costs, and then you have this very important activity called bottling, where you finish the manufacturing process of that good and it transitions to get ready to be sold. So it's either a cost of good immediately, or it transitions to finished goods inventory and has some carrying costs or storage costs associated with it until it's ready to be sold. Why is this so difficult to track, especially without production software? Simply put, liquid management, winemaking management is super complex from grape to bottle. And unlike really any other manufacturing process out there, I list some reasons here. There's so much liquid volume blending together, getting pulled apart. It's a very complex process. For example, you may be sourcing fruit from a single block in a vineyard, and you may be splitting that fruit up upon receiving it into 3 different process lots. From there, you may be bleeding off, you may be doing a saunier, you'll probably have multiple press fractions at some point. And then from there, blending, topping, capturing all that in a spreadsheet correctly, as this woman is illustrating here, can be very, very frustrating. And the folks on this call, you may be on the finance side, so you may be sitting in her seat from time to time trying to extract information from your winemaking team to be able to do this effectively. Or you're on the winemaking side and you have to communicate on a regular basis with your internal finance team or your external bookkeeper or accountant so they can do this kind of reconciliation. So by using production software like InnoVint, it alleviates so much of the stress and really breaks down the communication barriers and silos that traditionally exist between these two departments. So let's talk about InnoVint's costing module. What do we manage? We help you to manage both your direct costs, so again, fruit, additives, packaging, and your indirect overhead costs, facility costs, labor, consulting fees, winemaking consulting, custom crush costs from grape to bottle. It's super important for your business to know the true cost and how much it takes to produce each final product. Why is this important? Because this directly feeds into the company's profitability and the value of the business. So if you're overstating or understating or incorrectly stating your cost of goods, it directly affects the viability and the value of the winery. So again, super, super important to have production software manage this for you. And ultimately, we allow you to track multiple cost categories that map to your general ledger in your accounting software. And I'll speak more to this at the end of the live demo. All right, from here, I'm going to transition to a live account here. So most of you should be users or third-party consultants that have had access to InnoVint. So everything we go through here should be familiar at least. This is a lot detail page and we're on the cost subtab. So if you have costing activated, this will show up. And this is illustrating some of those active work in progress costs that I talked about. So this specific lot has about $42,000 worth of value on it, worth of cost on it right now in 5 different cost categories. And again, the cost categories will populate if the winery has costs within these different categories. Otherwise, they won't populate. And I show this now because it's a great time to get started with the costing feature if you're not actively using it, because all this can be backdated. You can actually get in your fruit costs from your 2020 vintage now. And I'll show you how to do that soon. You can also go back through year 2020 and enter your overheads on a monthly or quarterly or annual basis. So it's never too late to get started. For those of you that are actively utilizing costing, I want to insert a tip here for you that you may not know about. If you have a lot like this that is an active bulk wine lot and you do a partial bottling, I want to show you how we handle those costs. So this is a different lot here that we pulled some volume into a bottling action to bottle up some magnums. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that we have finished good costs that are locked with that bottling action. But there's still about 1,800 gallons of active bulk wine that's incurring additional inventory costs because this is still active. And you can actually see that here in the lot cost history. You can see that it was bottled here, just 23 gallons, not much, but again, this is magnums. And then we're maintaining the rest of the bulk and it's incurring additional overheads and direct costs accordingly. So if you see 2 different pie charts up top here, it's representing a partial bottling. From here, I'm going to transition to the costing section. And I'm going to illustrate what we just saw on an individual lot basis on a multi-lot basis. So this is showing all of the active lots at this winery, Hillside Estate, and the total cost across all these lots at once. So you have the total cost, the cost per unit, in this case, the cost per gallon in this account, and the cost category breakdown. So how much cost each of these lots has tied up. A really handy filter here is the upper left. If you'd like to see your total inventory cost as of a date in the past, for example, the last day of last month, as of 11:59 p.m., so the end of 2020, I can set this date and it will reset this report and give me the total cost at that point in time. I also want to mention here, all of the reports in InnoVint are always exportable to Excel. This is the link here, and if I click this, it'll dump it into a CSV. And oftentimes, there's more information in the export than you see in the interface. As an example, in this lot cost export, if you scroll to the right, and I'm sorry, it's probably pretty small on your screen here, zoom in, we actually show you the percent of main vintage varietal appellation vineyard for each of these lots. So if this is helpful for you, I recommend exporting, and you may find some little additional nuggets of data that would be helpful. One more thing to mention too, if you have multiple winery accounts in InnoVint, under the reporting section, there are a few reports that we report on the org-wide level. So we call them organizational wide. They're called multi-winery reports, the lot cost report being one. So this will actually report on all of the active lot costs across all of the wineries that you have under a single association or organization. We also have the cost audit report, which I'll speak to in a few minutes, across all of your wineries, and then a production losses report across all of your wineries. So if you weren't aware that these exist, because they are costing reports that fall in a different section under the reporting section, now you're aware. Okay, let's talk about entering costs. So first off, we have direct costs, fruit, packaging, additives as examples. Let's start with fruit. There are two ways to set the system up to pull in direct costs upon harvesting from your fruit sources. One is through the fruit cost worksheet, which sets a cost on each block per vintage, or through a grape contract. So you can have a grower or grape contract through the vineyards feature. I'm going to start with the cost worksheets here and show you how this works. So I'm going to open up the 2021 fruit cost worksheet. This is showing all of the vineyards that we have in the system and the associated blocks. It shows the cost that we paid last year, so last vintage, and also if the cost has been set on this year yet. I can set those costs now if I know them. And I can say, I would like to set the previous vintage cost, and it'll actually pre-fill that down if it's not changing. Or I can set and apply a specific value or just enter it manually. And from a unit perspective, we give you the option of it being a per ton, per acre, or per block cost. So I said a couple minutes ago that if you'd like to get your costs in for last year, we actually leave the 2020 fruit cost worksheet open and active, because if you set your 2020 block cost today, it will actually flow that cost all the way through your 2020 harvest to today. So again, there's no, it's never too late to get started with this. The other way to set a cost per vintage on each block is to use the grower contract explorer. And I'm going to toggle to a different tab here to illustrate that in a different account. These are a bunch of buy contracts at Wolverine Creek Winery. If you haven't investigated this, this is a very powerful feature. If you're sourcing fruit, we enable you to enter all the different specific terms of a grape contract or grower contract that you have, and you can set a specific cost or price for each vintage going forward. You can set an evergreen date, you can set reminders, there's provisions that you can set to notify you about bricks and other elements of that contract. And then we also show you a nice estimated cost for the upcoming vintage. So from a cash flow perspective, it's easy to look at the header here and see how much dollars I can expect to have tied up in incoming fruit based on my contracted tonnage each vintage. Okay, so those are the two ways to get fruit costs into the system. I also mentioned dry goods, so let's just take a quick peek at additives. Everyone has additives active. If you have the costing feature activated, you will see that you have the show costs button pop up, and you have more fields populate across this whole module. So you can see how much you have in dollars tied up in hand and the total cost per unit as well. So as you consume or make additions of these additives to your lots, we will pull through the cost that is associated with that inventory item accordingly. And then I should mention packaging here too for all of our users. It is at the final stages of testing. We are super excited to roll out the dry goods module in just a couple weeks. So you'll have a whole new interface here to manage your packaging and your additives. Okay, let's look at overheads now. So that's the other component of cost of goods sold. You have direct inputs and you have overheads. If I go back to the costing module, I'm going to walk through just a quick example of how to add what we call a cost item. Typically, this is managed by the finance team. They're the ones going in after your financial period and entering in an overhead. So let's say that I had at this winery $15,000 of production labor expenses for the month of December. And I want to amortize, or I want to distribute the value or the cost of production labor across my volume in the winery at that time for that month. I'll go and I will select the cost category. So in this case, it's labor and cellar. And I'll write in the details here. This is December 2020 production labor. And let's say I had a nice flat $15,000. I can make this effective as of a back date. So I can go in here and I can say, I want to amortize this expense as of the 31st of December 2020 at 11:18 p.m. I want to make sure we capture activity that day. And I can pull over the lots in my Explorer here. And it's querying and pulling the lots up and their volume as of that date. So you can use these filters further if needed, if you're looking to apply this overhead to a specific vintage or varietal or appellation or something that you have associated with a tag. But for this case, I'm just going to add all these 29 lots over, pull them back, zoom out a little bit, and then I have the option to apply this cost to my volume. And I have options here. In this case, I'm going to select, I'd like to distribute the $15,000 proportionally across the volume. I click apply and it takes the 15,000 and reflects the expected or actual volume of each of these lots. I can record that cost item. And now we see that I have this labor and cellar cost that has been effective as of the 31st of last month, and it's associated with 29 lots. And what's nice here too, everyone makes mistakes. You can go and you can edit this action if you have costing access and administrative rights to do that. Okay, so that's an example of how to enter all of your overheads. And you can imagine if you can get this done on a monthly basis, if you can go in and amortize your overheads, your labor, the rent, your utilities, you can get a really, really accurate picture of how much it's costing you to produce your wines based on how long they're in your cellar. Okay, let's go back to reporting. I'm going to walk through some of the value of some of the reports that we have here. I'm not going to go into detail, but if you have costing activity, you've likely looked at the cost over time report and the cost audit report. These are both great to understand more specifics on what happened during a given period. So the cost over time report looks at the starting and ending costs of each lot and any change that has taken place within that period. And for those of you that have been actively using this, we are days away from releasing a more robust roll forward report. So we will of course let you know when that comes out. And then the cost audit report is an activity-based cost distribution report. So if you're wondering, you did a 25 lot blend and you'd like to see exactly what happened to the cost distribution at that time, that is what that audit report is for. Okay, let's migrate here. I'd like to make everyone aware of the ability to lock out a period. So when you close out an accounting period, you've reconciled your inventory costs in InnoVint. I recommend going into the settings sections and going to the lock backdating option and setting a date. So this makes sure that no one can go in and mess with the costing data that you've locked down. For those of you on the call, you also have this for winemaking actions too. So if you'd like to truly lock down no winemaking activities and no cost can change before a certain date, you can do that here. All right, back to the costing tab. A couple more items before we open up Q&A. So from a reconciliation period, what you'll want to do is you'll want to know from the financial perspective, what was bottled each period. That's what this bottling cost report is for. So you can run this report and it shows you all your work in progress costs that have transitioned to finished goods by cost category, which will help your finance team. And you'll also want to know after harvest each year, how much you need to pay your growers for the tonnage that you received. That's what this report is for. It is broken down by each lot of fruit received and ties back to that initial financial implication based on your grower contract or based on the price that you have set for each of the blocks. All right, and then finally, just a comment on reconciling with your accounting software. This comes up a lot, whether you're using QuickBooks or Sage or an ERP system. At the end of a period, again, if you're doing this monthly, you're doing great. I've never seen anyone do it more often than monthly. You would want to record one or a couple different journal entries representing what products are transitioning from being manufactured to be ready to be sold. So you'll want to credit your finished goods inventory and debit your cost of goods sold. And InnoVint provides the reports at this point that allows you to easily record those journal entries. So talk to our team if you have any questions about that. All right, at this point, I'm going to open up Q&A. Looks like there's one question here from Nate. What's the best way of adding in cost for a service, such as mobile cross-flow and mobile bottling? I've been doing it as an additive right now, which works but isn't perfect. Let me push that live for everyone to see. It's a great question. So one option here for like mobile bottling is to enter that as a single cost item on that lot that was just bottled. So you can go in and set that as an overhead and say that it was a one-time cost due to bottling. And as long as you date it before the bottling action, it will be captured as an inventory cost accordingly. If you bottle first and then record the cost from just a date perspective, it won't be reflected accurately. You want it to come before the system closes out the inventory cost on that lot. Okay, here's another question from Rachel. You push this live. What about other journal entries in your accounting software, such as moving raw materials to work in progress and work in progress to finished goods, and provide the information in an easy format? Let's talk about that offline, Rachel. I think yes, absolutely. We can help you to get the right reporting to do that. And I can't see what winery you're with right now, but this is something that we could also automate with you on an integration standpoint. So we're working with larger wineries on some integration points. And if that's of interest to you, we can talk about that offline. Lois says, is it true that all bottling costs are recorded to each lot? Let's see. I think I need a bit more specifics here, Lois. If you're talking about locking in the finished goods cost at the end of a bottling, the answer is yes. If you're talking about recording multiple bottlings to a wine lot, we will accumulate those finished goods costs that we're locking into your final cost of goods, and you'll always have reference to that through the wine lot itself. So if you've had multiple bottling actions, you'll always be able to go back to your archive lots and see that. Yes, great. Thanks, Lois. You're welcome. I'll leave this open for a couple more minutes just to see if anyone is still typing. Oh, there's a question here from Brandon. For the new packaging and dry goods feature, is it going to track packaging supplies purchased and track further after a bottling run has been made? So it'll actually operate, push that live here. It'll work a lot like the additive feature. So when you purchase packaging supplies, you'd add them to your packaging explorer. And when you consume those packaging items in a bottling action, right now you have the text fields that allow you to enter the label, the glass you use, the closure you used. You'll actually pull from your inventory and you can indicate how much you use and if you'd like to consume scrap as well. So we'll accommodate from the costing perspective for that accordingly and appropriately. And then let me see, back to your question here. Can you track further after the bottling run has been made? I think to answer accurately, the answer is of course. So you will be able to report on, let's say you have a specific glass that you use over multiple bottling runs. You'll be consuming that glass until you have fully depleted that lot of glass or batch of glass. And just like the additive feature, you'll be able to have multiple batches of glass or lots of glass that you can pull from and consume. Lois has another question here. So reports of bottled lots will include juice costs and packaging costs that have been charged against the different lots. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I can actually show you, let me run a bottling report right here. Go back a couple months in this account and I'll show you what that looks like. So this downloads to a CSV that you can open up. And this will show you for each of the lots here. So here are your wine lots. It shows you the finished good cost category breakdown here. So exactly what you had tied up in consulting fees and packaging and overheads, lab analysis. So it absolutely breaks them down for you in that export. All right. Looks like we may be at the end of the Q&A. We're happy to answer any additional questions that you have. You know how to reach us. And we thank you for attending today. And we hope that you get a ton of value out of this feature. And we look forward to continuing to support you. Thank you so much.